Hi folks, Mr. Long here. This is going to be part two of the Completing the Square podcast, screencast. Specifically though, we're going to use completing the square to solve equations. We're not just going to complete the square to get the vertex, because we know if we need to get the vertex of a parabola, we're going to use x equals negative b over 2a. It's really a waste of time to do completing the square. However, completing the square to solve equations is a very good strategy, as you're going to see. It works every single time. In fact, it's the most universal of all strategies, along with the of course with the quadratic formula. But I think in many ways this is even a little bit easier to do. Okay, here we go. We're going to use two examples, and you have to remember everything that you saw in that first screencast. So here we go. All right, so this is coming off a worksheet that you're going to get for solving quadratic equations with the quadratic formula, or with completing the square, and this is number 8. So we're going to go through this with you. I'm going to go through this with you. Last year in grade 10, you didn't have to use fractions or decimals at all. This year it's going to be a little bit different. You are going to use fractions and decimals. Okay, so here we go. Let's do this one here. So let's see. It says x squared minus 7x equals 18. Well, the nice thing about completing the square is that you want to actually have your constant on this side, on the right side. And so we know that we want to complete the square on this side. So if I'm going to complete the square, let's see here. I have this right here, and I'm going to make a complete square. That's the first thing I have to do in this case. So I've got x squared minus 7x equals 18. So I know this is x squared, and these values in the boxes are always b over 2. So in that case, I'm going to have to take negative 7 and divide by 2. Negative 7 over 2x, negative 7 over 2x. Now, can I put that in a decimal? Yes, I can, because it can be a decimal because I'm dividing by 2. So I could put negative 3.5. Although when you start working with decimals, sometimes squaring isn't as much fun. Anyway, so we've got that. We know it's negative 7 over 2x on both sides to complete the square. So that's x minus 7 over 2, x minus 7 over 2. Sorry, not on both sides, but in both of these boxes, right? It's always b over 2. Now we have to literally complete the square. So what does it look like to complete that square? Well, it's going to be negative 7 over 2 times negative 7 over 2 for this box, right? Negative 7 over 2 by negative 7 over 2, which is going to be negative 7 times negative 7, 49 on the top. Well, I'm going to write it down here, negative 7 over 2 squared. And then over 2 squared, which is 4. Okay, so I have to add in 49 over 4. So in order to complete the square, I have to add 49 over 4, but you can't add it to just one side of the equation. You have to add it to both. So x squared minus 7x plus 49 over 4 equals 18, plus 49 over 4. And what we did is we added 49 over 4 to both sides. Okay, we added 49 over 4 to both sides. Okay, so now in the next step, what I can do is write this as a perfect square, which is going to be x minus, I want to use this one, x minus 7 over 2 by x minus 7 over 2. So that makes for a perfect square. X minus 7 over 2 squared equals, now if you have a calculator, 18 plus 49 over 4, you can do it with a calculator. 18 plus, and look at this, you can even do 49 divided by 4 equals, and you're going to get a decimal. And then again, you should have a button on your calculator that can take you back and forth. It's 121 over 4. Okay, equals 121 over 4. Okay, so if we look at this, on the right side, the left side, I've got something squared. What I want to do is get the square root of that on the right side. Well, the square root of 121 is 11. The square root of 4 is 2. So I'm going to write it this way. X minus 7 over 2 equals 11 over 2 squared, right? But the thing is it's plus and minus, right? Because I could square 11 over 2 or negative 11 over 2, and I would still get 121 over 4. Whoops, I forgot my square right there as well. And I want you to think about that for a second. What I did is I just took the square root of 121, the square root of 4, and then put the square outside. Okay, it's no different than writing this. I could have 9 equals plus and minus 3 squared, right? It's the same thing. It's the same idea. Okay, now I need to solve this equation. Now that the squares are complete, I need to solve my equation. Well, what do you do to both sides? You have to square root both sides. So x minus 7 over 2 will equal plus or minus 11 over 2. And if I want to make decimals, I can, absolutely. Again, I don't encourage decimals. You can, but I don't encourage them. So if you look at it, I'm going to have two answers coming from this, right? I'm going to have the negative one and the positive one. So the negative one is going to be, I'm going to have to, first of all, add 7 over 2 to both sides. So it's going to be, x is going to equal negative 11, whoops, sorry folks, it's going to be 7 over 2 minus 11 over 2. The other side is going to be x equals 7 over 2 plus 11 over 2. Okay, and so now 7 minus 11, I have a common denominator, right? 7 minus 11 is negative 4 over 2, which is just negative 2. That can be x1 or z1. And then x2 can be, well, 7 plus 11 is 18 over 2, which is 9. Okay, so my two solutions are x1 is negative 2 and x1 is negative 2 and x2 is 9. Okay. So again, my apologies, you hear one of our puppies barking out there. I'm sure that someone has got some food out and he's begging. Anyway, so that's the process for completing the square. I am going to go through and do one more now. Okay, and this will be video number 3 because I am going to do a really simple one to begin with. All right, so let's look at this. Look at this one here. Negative 7x equals 3x squared minus 1. So remember, I can just write this. I like the 3x squared. I want to keep that positive. I'm solving this equation, so I probably want to end up with this on the right side instead of the left side. So I can write equals negative 7x, right? And that just gets rid of that. And now what I do is add 7x to both sides. And I'm going to end up with 3x squared minus 1 plus 7x equals 0. Now, if you remember, when we complete the square, we want to get the constant on the right side. Okay, we want to have the constant on the right side. So here's what we do. We're going to add 1 on both sides. 3x squared plus 7x equals 1. Okay. So one of the things we do when we're solving by completing the square, not when we're just trying to complete the square to put it in vertex form, but when we're solving to complete the square, we're going to divide both sides by the a value. So we're going to divide every term by 3. So I end up with x squared plus 7/3 x equals 1/3. Okay, now it's time to start completing that square. So again, let's go figure out what half. I have to do half of the b value, half of 7 over 3. So I go back to my calculator and I put the fraction button and I do 7 over 3 and I move to the side and then I divide by 2 to get half of it. It's 1.166. Repeating, if I go back to a decimal, it's 7/6. Okay, so that means I've got 7/6x here, 7/6x here, and I've got x squared there. which means on the outside I'm going to have x plus 7 over 6, x plus 7 over 6. Now I've got a square. But it's not a complete square. It's not a complete square. So what we need to do in order to make it a complete square is I've got to multiply 7 over 6 by 7 over 6 to fill this in. Okay, so 7 over 6 squared. Well, 7 squared is 49. 6 squared is 36. Okay, so I'm going to have 49 over 36. So I'm going to have to add 49 over 36 to both sides. Okay, to both sides of the equation. So I'll end up with x squared plus 7 over 3x plus 49 over 36 will equal 1/3 plus 49 over 36. Okay, because I can't just add 49 over 36 on one side. I have to add it to both. Okay, so let's go back to our calculator. 1/3 plus 49, 36. So 1 divided by 3 plus 49 divided by 36 equals, and then I can convert it back to a fraction, a proper fraction, 61/36. Okay, let's go back. So it's 61 over 36 on this side. And on this side, I can now write that as a perfect square. Well, the perfect square is going to be x plus 7 over 6 squared, right? Because you can see, got that by that. That's what it, length by width. So I'm going to have x plus 7 over 6 squared is going to equal 61 over 36. But again, I'd like to put the right side in terms of squares. So I'm going to have x plus 7 over 6 will equal, well, it's going to be the square root of 61 over the square root of 36. Well, what's the square? Oh, the reason I put root 61 is because there's no nice decimal, or no nice integer answer or decimal, whereas square root of 36 is 6. And again, it's going to be plus or minus squared. Because again, it's whether I do plus root 61 over 6 or minus root 61 over 6, as long as I square it, I'm still going to get the 61 over 36. Okay, and I keep forgetting that's a square there as well. So now to solve this, what do we do to both sides? Square root. And I end up with x plus 7 over 6 equals plus or minus root 61 over 6. Okay, so I have that. Now what I need to do is I need to consider that there's going to be a negative answer and a positive answer. So this one here, x1 will equal, oh, I have to subtract 7 over 6 on both sides. Can't forget that, right? Because I've got this right here. I have to get that to the other side of the equation. So I undo adding of 7, 6 by subtracting 7, 6. So I end up with negative 7 over 6 minus root 61 over 6. Then on the other side of the equation, I do the plus one. So it's going to be negative 7 over 6 plus root 61 over 6. Now if you look at that, is there a common denominator there? 6 and 6? Yeah, there is. So x1 is negative 7 minus root 61 all over 6. x2 equals negative 7 plus root 61 all over 6. Well, I'm going to go down and take a look at that and see if I can find an answer, the solutions for that. So this one was number 10, I believe. Let's see, that was number 10. And let's go down and look at the answers for number 10. The answers for number 10, oh, look at that. Negative 7 plus root 61 over 6, negative 7 minus root 61 over 6, which is exactly the answers that we got. Okay, this is that's like a level 4 one, by the way, because of all the fractions and root signs there. Okay, and that we call that an exact answer, so I didn't actually have to get a decimal. It's a nice way to do it. And again, why didn't I take the square root of 61? Because I would get a decimal. So that's a nice, what we call exact value. I didn't have to round it all. Okay, folks, so again, you might want to go and review that video again and make some notes before you attempt your homework.